Thank you everybody for coming to today's event to talk about preschool in Indianapolis and the future of preschool. This program is brought to you by a partnership of Chalkbeat Indiana, a website that covers education in the state, also by Butler University's College of Education and WFYI Public Media. WFYI's partners, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the American Graduate Project. Also, the program is sponsored by Kroger. We very much appreciate Kroger for its role in sponsoring this. I'm going to introduce our panelists today. We have with us on the very end Jason Kloth, the Deputy Mayor for Education for the City of Indianapolis. Next to Jason is Shalonda Murray. She is the Director of Flanner House Child Development Center, a preschool in Indianapolis. And then next to her is Ted Maple, the President of Early Learning Indiana, which is a group of preschools, correct? And Ina Shelley, the Dean of Butler's College of Education. So thank you, panelists, for being here.
Thank you for having us.
All right, so there's been some news on preschool just over the last, let's say, 10 to 12 months. We had the legislature last year created the first ever pilot program to directly support some children to attend preschool, low-income children, including in Marion County, and a couple other parts of the state. In addition, Mayor Greg Ballard, Jason's boss, put forward what ended up being a $40 million public-private program to support preschool in Indianapolis. So that's getting underway. Both those programs are getting underway. And at the same time, over the last couple of years, Indianapolis Public Schools has been moving to expand its preschool offerings. Of course, one of Indianapolis Public's preschool offerings is the Lab School, which is a partnership with the Butler College of Education, which I'm sure we're going to talk about. So that's kind of a lot. So all of a sudden, a lot going on. And I think there's some optimism in the community to really make a difference on the preschool front and perhaps really provide the school districts and the schools in our city much better prepared children coming into kindergarten. So why don't we start there? Maybe Jason, we could start by talking about the mayor's program. What do you see as the next challenges going forward? It was a little bit of a bumpy political ride to get the program put in place. Now it's here. What are the next challenges?
Sure. Well, I think ultimately what we aspire to is for every child, but particularly children from low-income backgrounds, to have access to high-quality early childhood education. And so when we look across the county, we have about 154,000 children in Marion County. 28,000 of those are 3 and 4-year-olds, and about 57% of those children qualify for free and reduced lunch. So when you look at the scale of the state's On My Way pre-K program, and you look at the scale of the Indianapolis Preschool Scholarship Program, they're making a pretty significant dent, but nowhere near serving all the children that need to be served. And so our focus will remain on ensuring affordability for families through scholarships, and then accessibility and improving the quality of providers through both traditional public schools and nonprofit providers across the city. And that's really where the primary focus of our work needs to be, and why we're so excited to be partnering with those across our community.
Ted, let me ask you, this challenge that's sort of been laid out by Jason is improving, or I should say growing the good options for preschool in the city. That seems to be, this access issue seems to be a primary next step. What are your thoughts on how we can attack that problem?
Well, even with the launch of the state and city pre-K program, I think I saw the most recent numbers. We have about almost 3,000 children signed up for it as of this past week. I think what the partners around the city and the state are working on right now is to ensuring there's enough high quality places for children to attend. And with about 53 providers now in Indianapolis signed up, providers and schools signed up for the program, I don't think we're quite there. So I think we have some work to do to ensure that that we can meet the demand now that's thankfully created by this new investment. So I think there's a lot of efforts going on with United Way, with others, to get us there.
So I have sort of a question for each of you to start off, and then I'm going to ask questions and encourage you all to just jump in. But if you have anything you want to add to someone else's answer, feel free to go ahead. So, but your last point about trying to create new demand raises an interesting question, which I think connects to the work of Butler's College of Education and all the schools of education, which is who's going to teach these kids, right? Will there be young people who will want these jobs?
There will be young people who want these jobs. There's just, I think what we have to tackle are several issues to get there. At Butler, we used to have a 4-year major in early childhood, and we had to let that go because you can't ask students to pay what is expected of tuition and often have student loans and then go out and make minimum wage. It's just not possible for them. So we have a lot of people who want to do the work, but the salary has to be such that they can do the work and make it a good living. Right now, I will tell you another barrier that we've got to figure out is we have an elementary licensure program, and you can do a preschool minor. And we have students pursuing that. We're going to have to work with the Department of Education to not require 9 teacher licensure exams if you do preschool. Which makes absolutely no sense. So if you do elementary with preschool, you end up taking a total of 12 exams, 3 for elementary and 9 for early childhood. And no, I cannot explain that. There is no explanation.
What are the exams in? I mean,
they break it into all of the content areas, which they don't do for elementary. And if you think about it, elementary teachers teach math, science, social studies, literacy, music, art, but for early childhood, they have tests in all of those different content areas and domains, as well as a specialty in child development. Now, when you add that up, it's about $700 and some for students to pay for those licensure exams. So I find that interesting. I had a physician actually say to me, you know, I didn't take that many exams to become an oncologist. I mean, I don't understand this. And I said, I don't either. So I think that's something. But I will tell you that students want to do this work. I think one of the interesting opportunities for us to think about at Butler and other places is I would love to see us do an academy of where we prepare master teachers. In Reggio Emilia terms, it's called a pedagogista. It's a coach that regularly coaches the teachers. And I think we have a lot of people who have elementary licenses that may have stepped out of the field for a while for family reasons. They want to come back. They would be wonderful master teachers to get ready. Because one of the things I can tell you from studying other countries is they do have a support structure of creating master teachers who can support the current teachers and expand their skills, and then oftentimes the teachers they're coaching then aspire to become a master teacher and further their education. So I think we have to think about models and who is out there, but do young students want to do this? Yes, but I also think there are teachers out there holding licenses that would relish coming back and doing this kind of work.
So that was something I did not know. I learned something right here. I did not know there were that many tests. Yeah. And that's something that we'll have to find out more about at Chalkbeat. That's really interesting. Yes. Shalonda, I wanted to ask you, so you've recently changed jobs. You had for a long time managed one high quality preschool, now you've gone to a new one.
Yes.
So you're sort of trying to put your vision in place. You're only a couple months into it. But that's a perfect kind of moment for us to ask you about this. Like how hard is it to create a quality program in preschool, and what are the barriers?
It's definitely a challenge. Some of the barriers that we've encountered at both facilities is teacher qualifications. This is an old field, but it's a new profession. People are starting to recognize that this is an opportunity for a long-term career. So we're looking at a lot of individuals who may have the education, but not necessarily the experience. So we're trying to recruit individuals that have the education as well as the experience. But at the same time, these individuals want to make a livable wage. And as Ina alluded to, a lot of the salaries are low. And if you've been to a 4-year university, such as Butler or any other universities, you come out with some student loans. And you want to make sure that you're able not only to pay those student loans, but also to pay for your life. So we've encountered a lot of individuals that are moving away from the field simply because of the lower salaries. So a priority on for us as early childhood providers is to make sure that we're compensating them at a very competitive level. And also that compensation, wages is one issue, but benefits. They want to make sure that they have some desirable benefits. A lot of these individuals have families. The average age for a teacher over in our areas is about 33 years old. So we're looking at individuals that have families of their own. So wages, compensation, desirable benefits are all priorities when we're looking for attracting quality individuals to work with young children. So, yeah.
Jason, did you want to add something?
Yeah, you know, I just think about the teacher that my daughter has, who's actually at one of the centers within the Early Learning Indiana network. She is phenomenal, just absolutely a fantastic educator. You know, we are thrilled to have her. I mean, she's there at 6:30, 7 in the morning every single day. She has fully blown out lesson plans for our infant daughter. She sends us images of our daughter engaging in those lesson plans. She is every bit the educator that an elementary school or a middle school educator is, but because we've pushed no public money into these systems, their wages are artificially deflated. And so one of the things that we need to and we hope to achieve in this is a real bipartisan commitment at the city level alongside private philanthropic community and others in our city to push the state legislature to treat preschool the way that we treat elementary school, and hopefully that will bring up wages and make these programs like the wonderful ones that Ian is providing more of an option for someone who's interested in teaching early childhood education.
Yeah, we as a society invest the least in teachers of kids that need them the most. Yes. And I think that's a really important point to make. I was listening to a NPR story the other day about the types of jobs that where the employees need to be on public assistance, and they said 46% of child care providers are on some kind of public assistance. Now, we're talking about preschool, but the reality is right now most preschoolers are getting their preschool education in child care. Some of them really high quality ones. But we've got to fix this, and this is probably the biggest hurdle, I would say. We at our organization are in the position where we're trying to develop the workforce that we need instead of hiring it from the beginning. We hire people not quite where we need them to be, and train them. And Shalonda knows that well. She's done it as well. And we need a ready workforce. It's not just about supply of for the children, but supply of teachers.
So this is a fascinating issue. It's interesting that we hit this right off the bat. So let's talk a little bit about policy ideas that might get at solving this problem. So one policy idea that's already been, that we have some progress on, is we do have some new public money coming into into this arena, right? So my first question is, how big an impact can that in and of itself have in terms of driving the market? And Shalon and I were talking about this just before we came on stage. Like, does the mere presence of $40 million part, that's a 5-year figure, let's make that clear. Yeah. But over 5 years, $40 million in public and private money, plus the money from the state, plus some additional IPS investment. To what extent can just that effect have a good market outcome in terms of like driving up the value of a good teacher and helping them demand greater pay?
So if you don't mind, I mean, I think, so you look at the total amount of money that would go into the market for early childhood education between the state and the city over a 5-year window is $55 million. If you look at the overall current supply of level 3 and 4 providers on Paths to Quality, meaning these programs have an academic component as well as a safe learning environment. Right now, of the approximately 800 providers, as Ted said, only about 53 of those are level 3 and 4 that are registered to be able to accept the scholarship dollars. So one of the primary intentions of our program is not only to get children and families into these scholarships, but it's also to, over that 5-year window, change the overall supply of level 3 and 4 providers within the market, which will mean having stronger teachers, and then working to push the state to continue to fund this so that when the state does expand that, there'll be a supply of high quality providers to take those resources. Quite frankly, based on our analysis, I'm not sure that the market right now could take more than $55 million over 5 years, because there wouldn't be enough supply of quality providers to enroll those students.
So this is a little bit of a chicken and egg problem, it strikes me as, right? So like, we're gonna say, hey, we're putting 55 million into the system. This should allow preschools, for instance, to spend more on the students, and yet we've created these barriers on Nina's side of the fence where this is a tedious process where you have to take 1 million tests, number one, and then also the experience of the students who have gone before has informed us in a way where students have backed away from it. So how do we reverse that process on your side?
Well, I can tell you I'm already seeing an impact because at the Butler Lab School, when we opened that school, I was insistent that it had to have preschool, and there was no funding. We weren't there yet. And so I wanted to work with St. Mary's Child Center because of the children that they serve in our city with the highest needs. So the challenge was, how do you put that together? And how we did it was through funding from PNC and a private donor. And now we have 2 IPS classrooms thanks to this funding. And when you walk into the school, you'll see 4 preschool classrooms. You have no idea where the funding is from any of them. And it doesn't really matter because we're serving the children. But our students are wanting to teach in those preschools. And actually, I talked to one of my students last night who interviewed for one of those positions that's opening. And they're seeing that this is a real possibility. It's in a real school. It's got real money. You mean I'm paid the same as if I was teaching 1st grade? And it has benefits, and I'm a single person and I can do this? I want to do this. I also see the private providers working hard to bring those salaries up, and that's a real challenge for you all, but I see you making great strides in that. So I think it's becoming more realistic for our students. If I could, can I share an idea I have about this? Okay.
If you got a solution,
I don't know if it's a solution.
Everyone's all ears.
I don't know if it's a solution, but it's something I think about a lot. I have this hope, much like when we send business people to China to study economics and all. I would love to see like these wonderful panel members, some of our city councilmen, perhaps the mayor, along with, of course, with Jason, and some business leaders and some legislators. And I've already talked to the people in Reggio Emilia about this, that they would customize a trip for policymakers. And the reason I say that, and I want people to understand, yes, I'm very in tune with the Reggio Emilia philosophy, but it's more than just the philosophy. It's what that city has done. Because when you go there, you see everywhere you look the highest quality of programs. It doesn't matter what part of the city you're in or who they're serving, you see these rich environments, highly qualified people. How did they do it? It's their funding. It's how they fund it. And of course, they will tell you they were brought to their knees in World War II and lost almost everything. And they said, our life priorities are pretty clear. It's our children and our families. And so they've made an intentional investment in that. But they are open to saying, come tell us your story. We will listen to your story. Here's our story. What from our story may be of help to you? And I think if people could see that and experience it, I think it just opens new possibilities. The teachers, when you meet the teachers there, when people say, oh, they're a teacher, they're so respected. Oh, they're a preschool teacher. Oh, that's the most important work with our little ones. And it's like, oh my goodness, okay, we can do this. We can do this. And I think what's happened here, kudos, Jason and the city council and the mayor and the state. This is the farthest we've ever come in Indiana. this is farther than we've ever been. Now, at the same time, we're kind of laying the train track down as the train's behind us, trying to build that. I realize that, and that's difficult. But I think if we can build that train track, that infrastructure, and lift up the teaching profession, then we're a long way in figuring out how to do this.
Partnership, which is the core of what you're talking about, and let me first just take a moment to explain a little bit for our viewers and also brag about Ina. So, if you don't know, the Reggio Emilia approach to preschool was invented in an Italian city. It is a unique program. Ina is a national expert in it, and it is used in the Butler Lab School here, which is a partnership, as she said, between IPS, Butler University, and also St. Mary's Preschool. So those kind of partnerships, this all started from my original question being how to make these things work. Partnerships is an interesting idea, and I know, Ted, maybe I could ask you to talk a little bit about some partnership work you've done with charter schools at Early Learning Indiana.
Sure, we are currently partnering with 2 schools, Phelan Leadership Academy at 23rd and Illinois, and Vision Academy, which is out on the west side of Indianapolis on West 16th Street. Relatively new schools, both with leaders that are pretty entrepreneurial, and saw that, no surprise, when they're bringing children in that's primarily children from low-income backgrounds, that they're struggling when they get to school. They've not had the experiences they've had. They need to be successful from the start. So they reached out to us and asked if we wanted to partner. So we run 2 classrooms in each school for 20 children in each classroom, and that program is going really well in its first year. It's full, so we're happy about that. And what's also great is the On My Way Pre-K program that started in January has helped us serve those kids. And I think partnerships like that is what a lot of our programs are based on. I think they work really well. There's shared costs. There's shared goals. There's shared kids. And I think it's, partnerships only work if it's not one-sided, and there's certainly benefits to both. And we want to see more partnerships like that.
Yeah, that's great.
I want to ask you also talk a little bit about, you mentioned a moment ago the paths to quality, and let me quickly recap what that is also for our viewers. But the state has a voluntary rating system in which you can ask to be rated on a 1 to 4 scale, and generally levels 1 and 2 are basic health and safety. Like in essence, if you're a 1 or 2, it says the kids are safe there, and then levels 3 and 4 are where you see a quality academic program. A level 4 is actually a nationally certified preschool. So this is an interesting idea. When I first came to Indiana in 2011, I was intrigued by it. It's been very powerful in your prior work with United Way. One of the things that you did was help preschools step it up to a higher level on that scale. These are creative, sort of not government-driven solutions. You know what I mean? Like that's mostly done through volunteer work by the United Way and through centers that sort of self-select themselves to be evaluated and to try to improve. There's also nobody making anybody do the kinds of partnerships you described or you guys did at Butler, at IPS. And we should also mention that we have a very engaged business community. So maybe there are ways using those kinds of tools to create a more robust preschool community here. But is that enough? Can we do it that way? That's complicated. It requires a lot of moving parts. Like, will that work on a wide scale?
I think it's gotten us started, but I think there's a lot more needed. I think for one thing, past equality is a good tool. We should say it was originally created because of the disparity in quality in the child care system, and the real concerns around the basic health and safety in child care facilities across the city and state, and even up through the levels as the quality increases. even the highest levels are still not enough, because what it comes down to is the quality of the teacher. And you know, when I was choosing a preschool program for my child a little while ago, before there was past equality, we saw what would have been we looked at what would have been 2 level 4 past equality programs. All other things being equal, we chose one because when we walked in that classroom, we saw engaged teachers, and teachers that were not just watching kids, were not just kind of being there to quote unquote babysit, but were with the children on the floor, engaged with them, were interacting with them in rich ways, were planning experiences for these kids that will help them learn, thinking about their individual needs. None of that is required of level 4 past equality, I should say. And it's just like K through 12. We could have bright, shining new buildings, but it all comes down to that person that's spending 8 hours or 12 hours a day with that child. And so focusing on that person that can make the biggest difference, I think, is what we really need to think about.
I just, your answer there prompted me to think of this question, and we have Jason here who's recently been through that process. I also, it's been a while for me, but man, I remember finding it just daunting trying to figure out what was a quality preschool for my children to go to. And I mean, I remember when we got done picking one, and thankfully we picked one that worked really well for us. I remember saying to my wife, like, we're really educated. And my wife's got a master's degree in education. I'm an education reporter, and that was incredibly hard for us. Like, how hard is this for other parents? Jason, can you give us some thoughts on that?
Sure. So I think, you know, it's interesting the history of both early childhood education and K-12 education in Indiana. We have a very complicated system in general. We're talking about, on the early childhood side, a mixed delivery system, meaning it has nonprofits, traditional public schools, registered ministries. It's a wide group of individuals in this space. And the same thing is true, quite frankly, of our K-12 system. We have charter schools, traditional public schools, private schools with vouchers, magnets. And for a very long time in our country, we had a system that was much more simplistic in its approach. It was, you live in a neighborhood, you're zoned to a school, you attend that school. And that's all changing today. And for families that have been used to that, or that may not have the socioeconomic background, the way that my wife and I have, the ability to make those kind of choices, to pay for higher quality programs, to pick up and move for a different school, or to be closer to a high quality early learning provider. It can be very, very complicated for families to navigate. And so one of the things that both Child Care Answers, which is part of Early Learning Indiana, does is provides a referral service for families that are seeking out those types of programs that can give them information. The United Way is involved in making sure that families will fill out only one simple application to be able to enroll in either the state's program or the city's program. And we're actually one of 3 cities across the country that partners with a nonprofit organization called greatschools.org to be able to locate a preschool provider or a K-12 provider that best meets the needs of that family. So we're very interested in figuring out how to make this as easy as possible for families. But you're right, I mean, it is complicated. And I have to say, the first day that we took our daughter to childcare, it was an experience. When you're looking at everything in the center, like, how clean is that carpet? What's it? And so on and so forth. So, but we want to try to make it as simple as possible.
Shonda, I wanted to follow up with something. Just before we came on stage, we were talking briefly about the difficulty of replicating a good program. So here's I think one of the operating theories of what we're trying to do here in Indianapolis is create some new public investment in preschool, and we will help the good preschools expand, replicate with a second site or multiple sites or whatever. That's the theory. But it's not always very easy to do that. And I was telling Shalonda, I remember in my prior work, I covered a school district that had a very high reputation, Arts High School, right? And they had like 600 kids in the school, and they would have like 400 kids apply every year and audition to try to get in. They were turning everyone down except for 100 or 150. So I said to the superintendent, that here's an obvious candidate to replicate, right? You have a program that's so popular that you turn down a couple hundred kids a year, like make a second school. And he said to me, why do you think that school's good? He says, what do you think? Give me the one or two key factors about that school that you think makes it good. And I said, honestly, that's one of the best principals I've ever met. And then she had a unique partnership where they had an arts director, which you would not see in many K-12 schools, who was also very dynamic. And he said, that's exactly it. Where am I going to get those two? He's like, I can make another school and put the same name on it and have all the same programming, but if I can't clone those guys and put them over here, it's not the same school, and I risk diminishing the brand. So, Shalonda, tell me, what are your thoughts on how hard it can be to replicate a high-quality education program?
There's a lot of information out there, resources and things of that nature, but there are some challenges in trying to replicate a high quality program. We have to look at the families and the demographics that we serve. Coming from an East Side program to a West Side program, although I'm dealing with the same racial makeup, there's some vast differences in the cultures from the East Side to the West Side that we had to recognize, that I had to recognize personally. And so we have to look at those differences in the demographics, the different cultural concerns, the different neighborhoods that the families live in. And so there's a lot that we have to accommodate. And so providers have to take all of those different facets of the neighborhood and the community to create a program that would embrace the community, or that the community would embrace. So not only are we looking at teacher compensation, but we're looking at family engagement opportunities, community engagement opportunities, and then on the other end, we're looking at engaging other community programs for the families that will eventually benefit the child as well. So duplication is difficult because you have to look at the different demographics and the different needs of the community that you're going into.
And I guess that did actually come back to what's clearly been the big point of our conversation, the difficulty in, as we joked around, talent management. So that's what they call HR these days. But I mean, but really, that's the challenge, right? I mean, like, whether you want to improve the quality of your school, your preschool, your early childhood program by hiring better teachers, well, you need better quality people to come in. If you've got a group of high quality people and you want to make a second one of it, like, what's the effect of taking some of those people and seating the other one? Like, what do you lose here? What do you gain here? How do you backfill behind there? Ted, you guys have at Early Learning Indiana have multiple sites. You probably have faced or have thought about this. Well, you just had joint preschools and a couple of charter schools we talked about. How do you approach that problem?
Well, I think if we're looking at attracting the right individuals to lead classrooms, we might have to think differently. And it means, I'll give an example. We have a teacher who's actually a Butler grad. He's a music graduate, and his name is Mr. Seth. And Mr. Seth worked in our toddler room, and he writes songs for the toddlers. He plays his guitar for the toddlers. He has lessons plans for the toddlers. You can't transfer your child yet, Jason.
It's good to know, though.
He sounds pretty happy.
Making that identification early.
But how do we, I think what we're seeing, at least in our centers, is we're seeing more people interested in this as a career who are coming from different fields. How do we help people make that transition to ensure they have the content about child development, about how to interact with young children, how to guide behavior, but also can be really talented and serve children in classrooms well?
I have an idea about that.
Yeah, please. We loved your last idea.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, I think, and Ted, I really appreciate that, because I do think there are a lot of talented people who may not come directly from a school of education that do wonderful things. And so if we were to develop somewhat modeled after National Board for Professional Teaching Standards, where you work with the teachers, again, this goes back to having a coach So you have a master teacher coaching this person. Person develops a portfolio. They might be doing video that's watched by people like me. You can have a team of expert teachers go in and observe the teacher, and at some point we say, that's where your certification is, that there can be another route to that. Because I hope the walls of Butler do not fall in as I say this. It is not only a bachelor's degree. I think sometimes when Head Start put that in place, that you have to have the bachelor's degree. I thought, well, I know a lot of amazing teachers out there who may not have a 4-year degree, but are wonderful teachers, and they've learned through being mentored and practice and opportunities. And yet, am I going to look at somebody who's a really strong teacher that's been teaching 20 years and say, you need to take a history class, you need to take a seminar class in writing? I don't think so. And so I'm thinking, well, there's got to be another way, different from the CDA, a different path for those who can do that. And I think that's a really exciting opportunity that we should be able to do.
That's a great idea. All right, we're writing these down. We're gonna have, we'll just publish Ina's list of ideas. It comes out of this.
That's dangerous.
So all of the things we've talked about here, a key factor is the cost. And so I want to just share this story. As I was preparing for this panel, I called a friend who's works for a company in town that's very involved in preschool in Indianapolis, very supportive of the mayor's program and the effort to expand preschool. And I said to him, I'm like, hey, we want to do this event and talk about preschool. We think this is a good moment. There's all this new investment. So then there's a question of how the investment is going to work and how it's going to lead to good outcomes. Like, give me some thoughts on what I should ask the panel. And what he said kind of surprised me. He was like, you know what? The mayor's program is really great, but for this thing to sustain, we've got to have significant new investment from the state. He's like, I just don't see this working long term. Like the 5-year plan is great, but what's the 10-year plan? What's the 20-year plan? It's got to have greater state level investment for this to have an impact. So I'm interested in everyone's thoughts on whether that's correct, and is there a way we can get there? Because it was so. Was one of the first people I talked to when I came to Indiana in 2011. The first story I wrote was about preschool not being on the agenda here, this being one of the very few states where there was no public investment. And our first conversation we probably ever had, you told me your frustration about having pushed for this for like a decade or more with little gain. So how can we push that ahead?
First I'd say I think there are a couple fundamental questions that both policymakers and politicians need to grapple with that I think are very, very important. The first is, fundamentally, what is our collective responsibility to one another to provide for opportunity over the course of a child's life? And I think based on the overwhelming body of evidence that we see, there are significant academic achievement gaps and opportunity gaps for children from low-income backgrounds. So for me and for the mayor and for all those counselors that voted in support of this program, I think there was clarity that we have a responsibility to provide that opportunity. The second is, we live in a changing economy, in an information economy, and the supply of workers in that economy is driven by our education system. And for us, again, we believe that needs to start sooner in early childhood. We need to have a stronger K-12 system where we continue to rethink what we do. And then we need to think more carefully about what happens on the back end of that. And so ultimately, as politicians grapple with those questions, we need to be collectively trying to apply pressure. And our hope is that, again, with bipartisan support from the council, we will be more inclined to put that pressure on the state long term. The other piece is we're creating a constituency. When you're enabling thousands and thousands of families and children to be able to access something that they weren't able to access before, we're building a constituency for this work over time. And I think that's very important. But ultimately, to get to serve all those children that need this, we're going to have state dollars. I mean, that's that is exceedingly clear in my view.
And let me also add, federal money is not bad.
Yes.
Ted is making reference to Indiana's decision to turn down a federal grant for some reasons that surprised some folks. Go ahead.
Yeah, and Head Start seems to be a bad word for whatever reason, but there are a lot of good things about Head Start, early Head Start, about what it does for families. We haven't talked much about families, but Head Start is a program that wraps around families. If we're talking about young children in poverty, and we're talking really in general about young children in poverty, but whether it's the mayor's program or On My Way Pre-K, that do not have that safety bag that deploys around them when something goes wrong in their life that our kids do. Robert Putnam's new book is Our Kids is great if anyone wants to look into get an eye-opener about where we're going as a society. But when we think about how we're going to make this work, it doesn't stop at the classroom door. And early Head Start, which we've just started in one of our centers and with some partnerships. And Head Start is very focused on how do we ensure not only that child has a high-quality teacher, has a great curriculum in front of them, has good experiences, but also how are those families getting the resources they need in order to do right by their children, because they want to, they need to. Health, access to health services. So, I think we need to consider all resources. I also want to say, I think one thing that may be the future of early childhood, at least the near future, is how do we blend and braid different resources? I mean, the city of Indianapolis is really braiding and blending resources, public-private, for the preschool program. Head Start, early Head Start, child care partnerships that we're starting is how do we use the CCDF voucher funding, early Head Start funding to really pay for what it costs, because just chipping away at it little by little is not going to help.
I think also that we need to look at that fact that a lot of these children that we're focusing on are in poverty now, and if we don't make an impact now, they'll be in poverty later as well. And so on either end, the state needs to recognize that we either help them now so that we don't have to help them as much later, or we'll be looking at helping them for the remainder of their lives. So some investment from the state is necessary on the front end to prevent that long-term investment on the back end, whether that is referring to deviancy, crime, high school dropouts, insurance. There's a lot of opportunities that if the children have access to early education that may be prevented in the future. So we need to look at it in terms of long-term effects, how the state should get involved.
I think there's a piece that can help too. When I hear the discussion about does high quality early childhood wear off by third grade, I hear that a lot. I think one of the things in helping that discussion about, and I totally agree with you, Shonda, on those factors in society. There's also a wonderful research done. There's a book called The Scientist in the Crib, What Early Learning Tells Us About the Mind. And it was written by Alison Gopnik. She's a professor of psychology at the University of California, Berkeley. This was 15 years of research. And she said what she found was in those early years, young children possess the ability and that optimal development, and they show us they can do it when they're in high quality programs, of the very things that we identify as college and career ready skills. And what are those? Autonomy, creativity, critical thinking, lateral thinking. Those are all the things that we say we want at the end. Well, the optimal zone of development, if we used a term by Vygotsky, that zone of proximal development, that happens early on. Those are those critical moments. So it's far more than do they know their letters and their numbers and all all those things that, yes, we have to have those skills. It's much deeper than that. And if you miss that optimal period of development there, then we're working harder and harder and harder later to try and get those college and career ready skills. There's a poem written by Loris Malaguzzi called The 100 Languages of Children. He was the founder of Reggio Emilia, and he talks about how in that poem it says children start with 100 languages, 100 ways of knowing, being, doing, thinking, observing the world and understanding it, and we take away 99 slowly. We say, no, don't think that way. There's one answer. You do it this way. You can only, X, Y, and Z. And then we get to the end and say, why aren't they able to think critically? And, well, gee, I don't know, we undid it. And for many of our children, they miss that optimal period of development. So if we could help people in workforce development, people who are saying, but where's the, well, let's see the connection here between the early years and that development. It's not just letters and numbers. It's more than that.
You mentioned this, you made reference to this research question, which is, to put this as nicely as I can, there's just not that much research out there, honestly, about longitudinal research showing the long-term outcomes for kids of being in preschool. So you see studies, you do see a handful of those studies. They're very interesting, but they're very small, and they tend to show remarkable life change outcomes, like kids who have high quality early preschool, like as adults in their 40s are like less often involved with the courts. They make more money, they have more family stability, all this sort of thing. But people look at those studies and say, yeah, those are small, they can't generalize them. But then when they try to do the generalized studies, they often look on a shorter window. So they'll look, for instance, like how do test scores change for a kid who has preschool versus a kid who does not between kindergarten and 12th grade. And that's what you referenced, is that you will see a fade in the test score advantage by 3rd grade, right? Now there's some argument that you see it reemerge when it comes to high school performance, particularly graduation rates and that sort of thing. But it's difficult to quantify that. So to what extent, with the new programs that we have coming out, can we demonstrate through new research that the impact is good enough that legislators will want to invest more in it? I think that's a challenge I hear from legislators all the time. I definitely hear, oh, the test score advantage goes away by 3rd grade. They're just not convinced that there's evidence, despite the fact that folks like who study this would jump up and down and say the evidence is very strong.
So, please.
Well, I think one thing is we have to widen the lens of assessment. And our society, other countries look at us and just shake their heads. Literally, they say, you people are obsessed with measuring everything, and everything has to be quantified, because some of the things that are most valuable can't be put into a number form. So how do you go about doing that in research? Yes, there's quantitative data, the test scores. There's qualitative data, but we tend to discount that. But I will tell you, in an academic setting, a qualitative data study is as rigorous in research and as valid and reliable as quantitative studies. Qualitative studies tend to capture more of that richness and the complexity than just a score. And I'll give you an example. For some of you may have seen, I did a TED Talk or TEDx in Indianapolis, and I had this drawing that a 4-year-old had done. And it had lots of beautiful colors and shapes, and my conversation with her was, you've used a lot of colors today. And her response was, this is my work on shape continuity. Guess what? There's no test that's going to capture shape continuity. I captured it in video with her, and I said, what is shape continuity? And she said, I've repeated the shapes, that's continuity, and I've made it go in different directions and different sizes with different colors. That can be captured in qualitative data. Now, could she tell you the colors? Sure. But again, we are so focused on just a number and a score, and people are more complicated than a number and a score. So I think the qualitative data, I do think documenting children's learning, making learning very visible for people, other than just here are the numbers. We have to do that, and we're going to have to help policymakers understand that kind of data. Those longitudinal studies, they were very rigorous. You don't get to publish a study like that without having some very high standards. They're very expensive and complicated, so it's not like there's tons of dollars to replicate those easily too. So.
Jason?
Yeah, sure. So I agree with what Ina just said. I think that I do think we need to take a more sophisticated approach to research as it pertains to education, though I also believe very strongly in the need for quantifiable evidence. You know, when you look at the overwhelming body of research on early childhood education, the return shows anywhere from $1.80 to $17 return on investment over the course of the long term. You look at the most rigorous randomized controlled trials, and you see between $4 and $9 return on investment. So the overwhelming body of evidence here suggests that this is worth it. And then common sense tells me that if I'm willing to spend $15,000 on my daughter, why would we not be willing to spend some portion of our public resources on those families that are living in poverty? But I do think that what we're doing here now creates a really, really unique opportunity for Indianapolis to be important in this discussion, not only on the Indiana stage, but on the national stage. The fact that we are going to be executing a lottery means that there will be some portion of students that have access to these programs and some portion of students that unfortunately do not. And there is an opportunity to have some form of randomized control trial while also being really thoughtful about the overwhelming qualitative body of evidence on things like health, persistence, and the character traits that successful adults demonstrate. I think there's a real chance here. The challenge is a randomized control trial costs millions of dollars to conduct. And so we are in the process of thinking through that problem right now so we can go back and say, here's who's your children, here's what the evidence says about those opportunities for them.
As a journalist, I can tell you I would love to see that kind of data. It would just be fascinating to learn what we could learn about kids. I wish research wasn't so doggone expensive all the time.
Jason mentioned something we've alluded to, haven't talked much about, and that is the one thing that's not captured in test scores, and that is the value that early childhood plays in the social development, social and emotional development of the child. It's interesting when you talk to kindergarten teachers about, you know, what do you think kids need most when they enter kindergarten? You don't hear ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. You don't hear identify colors. You hear understand how to work in groups, know how to communicate with their peers and adults, self-regulation, understanding what it means to have patience and demonstrate that. These are things that can't be captured in a test score and are perhaps the greatest benefit of early childhood education because everything else is dependent on it. And when you mentioned the kind of the quote-unquote fade-out effect, what we don't always, what the critics say is that fade-out effect of the test scores, you may see some leveling off there, but the social and emotional competence continues to skyrocket and shows really solid long-term benefits down the road when children are adolescents and teenagers and certainly adults. So I think we really have to not discount that benefit of early childhood. Even Governor Pence, when he visited one of our centers, asked about that and the role that preschool plays in social competence. So I don't think we should undersell that at all.
So I want to take some questions in a moment. I'm going to ask one more question, and then if anyone here in the audience would like to ask questions, I think what you can probably do is just raise your hand and shout it out because we're not a gigantic group today. So let me ask this one, though. Everything we're talking about, well, all these studies that look at this long-term positive effects has this qualifier. It's got to be high-quality preschool, right? So here's a problem, is people say, let's have more preschool, and then we have more preschool, but if we don't increase the quality of the preschool, then the kids will not show the positive effects. Low-quality preschool does not have this incredible multiplier effect that the high-quality preschools do, all right? So as we expand via public policy, as we're investing more and hoping to get preschools to open and replicate and more, right? We definitely need more. How do we ensure quality? And as I was thinking about this challenge, I thought about some of the recent work in the charter school arena, and I'm actually honestly not thinking so much about the mayor, although this is certainly true of the mayor's office, but just in the last couple of years, Ball State made a very concerted effort to raise the quality of its charter schools, and one of its strategies was it closed low performers, okay? The mayor's office also has a track record of closing low performers. Is that something that we need as part of this plan? Does there need to be some sort of way to take action if a school is part of the program or has been invested in and does not show the kind of results that we want?
Well, I think we're trying to control for that on the front end now. So in order for a child to obtain a scholarship, they have to attend a level 3 or 4 or nationally accredited program. And the intention behind that is pretty basic economics. It's just if the money that comes into the system can only be directed to programs that have these specific components that have proven through the body of research to demonstrate long-term benefit, if those resources can only be directed there, that over time the supply of those kinds of programs will grow and increase. As to whether or not we should close those that aren't demonstrating, I think we would have to have, I think that's a next step. To be honest, I've never actually considered that question, just because we seem so far away from it. But, I think what we're trying to do is to control for that more on the front end at this point.
I think parent choice is really important. With the On My Way Pre-K and Indy Preschool, it's giving parents the opportunity and discretion to pick facilities. We can close those facilities by decreasing their enrollment. If families are informed about what quality is and what it looks like, perhaps they'll choose quality facilities for their children, because families do really want the best for their children. They may not be able to afford it, but they really do want the best for their children. And when we look at facilities or child care agencies that do not fulfill the quality, then perhaps parents will choose not to take their children there, and indirectly those facilities will die. And that's our hope on the provider end.
Yeah, I spent a long time in my professional career writing about charter schools, and that was definitely in the early days of the charter school movement, that was the primary theory for how quality be maintained. And I would say even within the charter school community now, there's pretty wide agreement that that didn't work, because what they found was people chose schools based on non-academic factors, for instance, convenience to home or simply recommendation of a trusted friend were often reasons why people chose their schools, and probably also true with preschool. Yeah. So this is actually why I asked the accountability question, is because it's been fascinating to watch particularly proponents in the charter school world come to that realization and then become advocates for accountability for low performers because they stopped believing that the market was the solution there. So that's probably going to be an additional challenge as we move forward in preschool.
This is also more complicated than other kinds of choices that consumers of anything make. If I went to the average person and said, here's an iPhone, here's a dial tone phone, which would you choose if they were both free to you? Everybody but my grandparents are going to choose the iPhone. And actually they have iPhones. But selecting a school and what goes into creating a great school is almost like selecting a healthcare provider. These are not the sorts of choices that are easy for the average person to make and to disaggregate what are the things that are most important in the composition of that school and what they want for their child. So I just think it's a more complicated and nuanced set of decision making than making basic decisions on something as simplistic as an I-STEP score.
Yeah, that was very interesting. So let me take any questions, if anyone has questions. Yes, please, right there.
I remember things that crossed my mind, but to begin with, what age group are you considering for preschool education?
So that's a good question. And this is something that comes up in my work as a journalist. Like, what's pre-K? What's preschool? What's different? Can you help us define the terms? Whoever wants to.
Depends on.
You run a child care center or a preschool center. Tell us what it is. Where does it go?
It is, it would help to have common language, and I think we use these terms interchangeably a lot. I think even sometimes people use the word preschool to talk about birth to 5, which we haven't really talked about much, but we really need to talk about more, if not here, somewhere. I think for us, preschool includes ages 3 and 4. And in some cases, pre-K is that year right before kindergarten, which I know that's how for example, the On My Way Pre-K defines it. And the Indy Preschool program is 3 and 4-year-olds.
So generally, 3 and 4-year-olds is what we define in what we're talking about here.
So my second part of that question would be, based upon what we know from neuroscience and cognitive development, and studies like Too Small to Fail, why are we still talking about age 3? Why aren't we talking about the things we need to do before people decide to have children, and educating them and preparing them so they have the tools necessary to make sure that their children don't have a 32 million word gap by the time they come to your preschool, because we've essentially lost a lot of time and opportunity and made irreparable damage to a community.
So this is a great question. It gets at this whole question of 0 to 3. So this is one of those difficult policy questions where we just fought a 15-year war to get some funding for 4-year-olds only from the state, right? So that's how hard it is to get any money. But 0 to 3 is arguably more important even than 3 and 4, because as you described, there's a lot of neuroscience evidence that's when there's a extreme amount of sort of brain activity and brain building. So I know that when I worked in Ohio, there was a very interesting program where they would actually send out folks to sort of train new parents. So these were children 0 to 18 months, and someone would come visit your house and they would just give you general advice. And I wrote about that program once. It struck me as very good. It was cut the minute there was a funding problem in the state, because that's an expensive program and not seen as valuable. Any thoughts on how we can attack this 0 to 3 area?
Well, that's a great question. I'm glad that was raised. There's a wonderful program that's a federally funded program called Nurse Family Partnership, and it is in Indianapolis, and actually now it's in many parts of the state. Operated by Goodwill here and operated very effectively. Now it's serving over 600 mothers. And the way it works is it pairs a nurse professional up with a mother in the second trimester, and that nurse works with that mom, that new mom, all the way through that the child's second year of life. And and it has great outcomes. I mean, we see reduced smoking, all kinds of reduced risk taking, prenatal, but then once that child enters that first year of life, that support continues, not just health needs of the parent, but educate how that mother and father can support that young child. So I think I'd love to see programs like that grow. It's very expensive, and that's important to say, but well worth it, and has great research.
And the real answer to that question is it's all a matter of prioritization on the part of voters. I mean, the reality is you're looking at, in Marion County, 154,000 children, as I said earlier, and 28,000 of them are 3 and 4-year-olds. The average cost of a high-quality center is around $8,000 for those families. So just do the math: 8,000 times 28,000, and that's just for 3 and 4-year-olds. And then think about what the tax rate on that would be, and then make decisions about who you vote for and how comfortable you are paying that tax rate. But that's really fundamentally what this is about. There are so many different competing decisions that policymakers and elected officials have to make. I mean, most people don't realize, for instance, just the city's budget, 93% of the budget goes to one thing, which is public safety. The remaining 7% goes to your sidewalks, it goes to your parks, it goes to other pre-K, it goes to these other priorities. And those are the same kind of decisions that our elected officials at the state are making every day. And so that ultimately really does come back to the decisions the voters make.
And I should mention, and I'll take your question in just a second. Sometimes when I think about preschool, we should also remind ourselves, it's very easy to feel frustrated with how much more distance there is to go. We're not even talking about 0 to 3, right? That's a huge area, right? But also realize that there's been an incredible amount of progress made. Like I just tell you, as a journalist who covers education, 10 years ago, when I would get approached by lobbying groups that wanted me to write about preschool, I would just think, that's not my job. I'm the education reporter, I cover schools, right? I cover K-UP, right? And so for me, as a journalist, it's been an evolution over 10 years to understanding why this matters, why this belongs as part of our coverage in writing about issues of education, right? And I think what we've seen, with finally a preschool pilot program, with the city doing this. Could the city have done this program 10 years ago? Probably wouldn't have had the same kind of support in the business community and in the wider community. So there has been a lot of progress. It's just that there's so far to go on this stuff that it really feels like there's a huge distance ahead. But let me take your question, please, back there. Go ahead. Are you talking about the nurse program that he described? So the question is, because what you're getting at, which is what Ted said, is that those programs are expensive, mm-hmm. right? So she's asking, we're doing partnerships on and all sorts of other things, like we described several on preschool. Is there a way to get a partner to make those kind of programs work?
I know.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. Correct.
Yeah. I know that. Goodwill certainly put a lot of its resources into making it work, and not just, and they also bring in something they call Goodwill guides that help that family navigate, for example, the child care system, and getting them to a great school. But I do know there's been some private funding put into expanding that by IU Health and some other counties around Indiana, by the Glick Fund out on the Far East Side. So. But this is really going to take a huge public investment. We can bring private funds into this, but as Jason said, it's a matter of priority, and I'm hoping, it does feel like we're a long way off, but I'm hoping we can get a lot closer sooner.
Scott, that takes me back to my earlier comment about having this hope that we could go see a place that has been at this since after World War II, and their priorities shifted greatly. And I think it is about priorities and what can we learn from another place. And I also wanted to comment, I appreciate your acknowledging the 10 years. At Butler University, just across the way in the library, are the archives of a woman named Eliza Blaker. WFYI did a beautiful job putting that into a documentary. She brought kindergarten to Indiana. There's a letter in the archives that she wrote the Indiana State Legislature 102 years ago, mm-hmm. advocating for the need for preschool, kindergarten, and parent education. Mm-hmm. So in some ways, 10 years, yes, and in some ways, 102 years. and I know that there are guests in our audience that have been advocates for decades. I can remember when Evan Bayh was governor, and a lot of us worked on a plan that had great hope and possibilities, and unfortunately didn't get sustained. But all of that good work has finally led, hopefully, to this point and that patience. And so if we go rapidly now, I'm ready to strap on the seatbelt and go, because I've been waiting, as many people in the community have been. But it's going to take all of us. And I always think about, I'm really disturbed day after day in the local news about the number of shootings. And when we had 5 children under the age of 8 shot in our city in 2 days, that's horrifying to all of us. And all of these children are our children. And so we have to figure out what we're going to do as a community for our children. It's not someone else's children, they're all our children. So what are we going to do about that? And I think we're right on the verge of moving into finding those solutions together.
Jason?
But to that point, I mean, you know, it's funny, as I became a father and then I watch the news and I see these things happen, and, you know, I get probably more emotional than I would have in the past when I see things like that. But I do think one of the important steps that we're taking right now is the recognition that we cannot police our way out of our problems. We cannot have enough police officers to be on every corner of every street, on every location where we might have a problem. And so when we see a body of evidence that tells us there are all these benefits that are going to help reduce these challenges, we need to buy into that body of research and rethink the way that we behave as policymakers. And I think that we are on the crux of that shift. But you know, a small story that gets at what was just said. I remember standing in front of the United Way to talk about the Indianapolis Preschool Scholarship Program with a room full of advocates. And I get up there and I think I'm going to say something really profound, which is we need to start sooner, strengthen our K-12 system, and look at workforce development. And they all look at me like, yeah, we've been saying that for 15 years. You're just getting around to this now. And I think that's absolutely true, but we are making progress.
Yes, yes.
We have time for another question or two. Do you have another one? Yes, go ahead.
Is it time to reframe this discussion and move away from just simply talking about poverty? And here's sort of my rationale for that. Only 26% of American children, white American children, are prepared for college. This is not only 4% of African American children graduate are prepared for college. But this is not just an issue about poverty. This is an issue about what we're going to do as a country moving forward. 60% of our jobs are STEM related, yet only 42% of African American children actually receive a college degree. Only 4% of African American children get degrees in STEM. Only 20% of America are prepared for the jobs that are coming down the pipe, and the 60% of jobs. So why are we still talking about this as if we're talking about those kids and then these kids? Because the statistics tell me that the panel on that, you all been sitting here, that 3 of the 4 white folks on the panel, only one of you all will have a child who graduates from college, this college, or from high school, who's actually college.
Wow. So let me try to repeat the sorry.
Which one of the 3 of you all are willing to not have your kids be college ready?
So let me quickly repeat the question because they need it for the microphone. But the question is about the broader, as best I can here, the question is about the broader issue of college readiness, and there's a lot of focus on the lowest, the highest poverty children here, but isn't this a broader issue because many children, even from middle class and higher households, don't arrive at college ready to do that level of work? Jason?
So this is kind of my new obsession after early childhood, which is just workforce development questions. And if you look at what we've done over the course of our country's history, our education system constantly responds to the changes in our economy. So we move, we're in an agrarian economy, we have an agrarian calendar year, and high school isn't mandated. You move into an industrial economy, you need a higher level of education, we mandate high school, and we say our high schools are going to look kind of like what our factories look like. We're going to be on 15-minute bells. And now we're shifting into an information economy. And it is incredibly clear that in order to be part of the middle class, the knowledge and skills that require you to be able to participate in that economy are moving like this. And our education system and the way it's changing in terms of early childhood and particularly higher education, it's kind of like changing at a more shallow rate than what the need is. Well, in the past, when anyone had the knowledge and skills to work in a factory, for instance, they could do very basic labor. Then through government policies and through unions, there was a way to create a middle class, sort of artificially in my mind. With the knowledge and skills required in the upcoming century, there's not going to be the ability through these kinds of policies to do that necessarily. We absolutely have to shift our level of prioritization of education and the way we approach education to keep up with the changes and requirements of the economy. And there's a whole nother panel and discussion that could be just on the subject of workforce development and how we think about higher education. But you bring up an incredibly relevant point, and I couldn't agree more with the notion that we have to do more on the front end and more on the back end for everyone.
We're coming to the end of our time. I might be able to take one more question. There's one more out there. Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. I would just be curious from the panel, the most creative funding source that they've seen for preschool.
So the question is, what is the most creative funding sources any of you have seen for preschool? Maybe certainly the partnerships. Are there other ideas beyond that?
Social impact bonds would be the most creative, I would think.
Can you tell us what social impact bonds are?
Sure. So basically what a few places have done is they look at the size of public investments in any particular intervention. So a great example out of New York is recidivism into the criminal justice system in some way, shape, or form. And the idea would be it's really expensive to have people coming back into the criminal justice system over time. So if you have an intervention that you think can reduce that level of recidivism in a way that can be very clearly measured, private capital through the forms of social impact bonds can be invested into that particular intervention, and then the public pays them back through the savings that they see in the reduction of that recidivism and its relative cost over time. Utah is now in a partnership, I believe, with Goldman Sachs, an investment bank, is doing this work there. There's a lot of controversy around the notion of social impact bonds. And the other thing I would be remiss to say is, just on the philanthropic side, I think this is very important, and I want to make it just a public comment. Our corporate community in Indianapolis and our philanthropic community did something here that was just remarkable. They used a moment in time to and the catalytic role that philanthropy could play to make it politically difficult for people to not support this. And Eli Lilly and Company, in particular, alongside PNC, who's been very involved in this, and others, by stepping up and putting that money out front, it meant that we as political officials and elected people had a harder time walking away. And so I think it was an incredible testament to the strength of our philanthropic and our corporate community. I wanted to put in a plug for that.
Anybody else want to address that point?
Jason, just to absolutely support everything you just said, I think that you made me think of this with the social impact bonds is the judicial part. There's a state senator, Randy Head, who's a deputy prosecutor, who totally understands the importance of the early years and has done wonderful summer studies of early childhood and been extremely supportive. I happen to have a dear friend and colleague who's a federal judge. She happens to be a Butler trustee as well, but she came to the lab school and saw what was going on and said, I want to get involved with this family because I've seen this too many times in my courtroom. I know that this can be turned around, and I do think when we've talked about the business world, and our business community has been just amazing, but I think we start thinking about who are the other people who understand the value of this and how we can make this change, and I think reaching out to the judicial piece, that's just brilliant, I think would be wonderful.
Good idea.
Yeah.
All right, so I have a final question for you. And I'm going to put Jason on the spot because I think that he's probably the guy who thinks down the line in a way that best prepares him for this. But let's say we reconvene here 3 years from now. So it's 3 years in the future. The mayor's program has progressed. The state's program has progressed. The IPS's program has progressed. What do you think the state of preschool is in 3 years?
You know, honestly, I haven't given it much thought, as I won't be in the mayor's office at that time. No, I'm just kidding. You know, when I think about what I hope will have happened is, I hope that we will have thousands of children who are going through those programs, and as part of that, they sign a commitment to enroll their children in kindergarten, which isn't a mandate in Indiana, so you don't have to start school until 7. But I hope to see those thousands of children in kindergarten with the skills that they're supposed to have as they enter, so that we can see them on a trajectory to success that they otherwise wouldn't. And I would love to be able to walk into those classrooms and see that happening and hear that from teachers. The second thing that I think I hope happens is that we create this constituency and that we build momentum around it, and that we truly do have folks from all flights across our city going to the state and saying, here's the evidence, here's the research base, let's step up and start doing even more.
Shalonda, do you have thoughts on what the state of the world in preschool will be like in 3 years?
I'm not sure, but what my hope is that families will be more empowered to make better choices. They'll be engaged in these decisions that we're making on the local level and the state level, and that parents will be educated, because at the end of the day, the families deserve an opportunity to have access to quality early education programs.
Ted?
3 years might be a little aggressive for this, but I don't think it's impossible. I think what we really need to be working toward, and this is what we are doing with other partners in a statewide level with a Lilly Endowment grant we received this year, is to build a cohesive system between schools, community-based providers, and others that really creates an early childhood system that's worthy of investment from families, from parents, that is really high quality and has enough seats to serve the kids that need it.
Ina?
I would love to see a robust group of students coming out prepared to teach in preschool and wanting to teach in preschool. I'd love to see a strong cadre of master teachers and coaches in place. And I would love to see somehow loan forgiveness for those students who choose to go into this, or even partial loan forgiveness. Maybe there's some benefactor that says, I'll do that. And I would also then say, I would like to see that other cities would start coming to Indianapolis saying, we're trying to do this too, how can we learn from you? So I think that would be wonderful.
Maybe you'll have to reinstate the early learning credential or major that went away.
Well, I can tell you it's underway right now.
Oh, is that right?
Not to the curriculum committee yet, but it's underway.
Well, there you go. A little bit more news out of our event today. So this has been really great, and I just want to thank everyone for coming out, but particularly our panelists. It's a glorious Saturday in April to come down here and talk about education policy, preschool policy. We really appreciate everybody's involvement. I do want to again thank our partners and sponsors, Chalkbeat, Butler University's College of Education, and WFYI. Also, of course, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the American Graduate Project through Public Media. And finally, Kroger sponsored this event and really made it possible, and we really appreciate Kroger's involvement. Thank you very much. Great opportunity.
Thank you.